Laura and I are not really activists. We were too young in the 1960s when being called a baby boomer was kind of cute. And some would say that we're too old now, that we're in our 60s. And it was not our intention to make social justice marches a rite of passage for our grandchildren. But in January 2017, when we joined the Women's March in Nashville, we took Damon along. It was just a few weeks before his 13th birthday. In the summer of 2020, after the world witnessed the knee on the back of a man's neck for the last 8 minutes and 46 seconds of his life, we joined a march for racial justice. Chelsea wanted to go along. It was just weeks before her 13th birthday. I was putting finishing touches on a blog post when I first heard the name of George Floyd. That post was about two men who did not die. Travis and his work partner Kevin are the two black furniture delivery workers who were driving out of a gated community after making a delivery. They were in a truck marked with the company name. They were wearing company uniforms. They were leaving the gated community. As they were about to exit the gate, a car pulled up to prevent their exit. The white driver got out of his car and began asking questions, which Travis did not feel compelled to answer. What are you doing here? Why are you here? Where are you coming from? All you have to do is just tell me where you're going. In a few minutes, another white man walked up and joined the interrogation. After about an hour, the white man who had received the delivery vouched for Travis and Kevin, and they were allowed to leave. What did these white men see when they encountered Travis and Kevin? Their bias was more than implicit. All they could see is something sinister in two black men leaving that community. And they felt it was their duty to apprehend these men as if their white skin deputized them with a badge of law enforcement. I wrote to inspire empathy for Travis and Kevin. I didn't know that other more tragic actions would actually invite that feeling and the subsequent responses. Empathy was everywhere that summer. Many gained a crash course in empathy, even if only for a moment, a few days, or a few weeks. That summer, I was contacted by people I barely knew, people who were friends of friends. Many of those contacts were focused on care for me. It felt a little strange to me because my life didn't feel any more vulnerable after that infamous 8 minutes and 46 seconds than before. But the marches, the calls for policy change, the drive to process and understand events were new, and they were driven by empathy. We talk about trying to walk in another's shoes, but empathy can fade and it can grow distorted into something like pity. We can all become weary of social action. When the dust settles, we all go back into our silos of like people, like-minded, alike ethnically, alike ideologically, or whatever. But what are some everyday ways to combat injustice without burning out? One starting place is to cultivate curiosity. And I mean a particular kind of curiosity. It is not voyeurism or cultural tourism or demands for attention. In their legitimate quest to understand, some people have demanded great emotional labor from Black people to explain things. But there are legitimate ways to cultivate curiosity and satisfy it. We can educate ourselves. 2020 exploded with Black voices and allies of all stripes who can lead the way in anti-racism. Keep amplifying them and keep educating yourself with their books, websites, webinars, podcasts, films, and workshops. And exercise the power of proximity. If we are in environments of people who are just like us, it's difficult to maximize curiosity. But if we find ways to be around people who are different from us, to work with, serve with, even play with, we make the most of curiosity. For some of us, 2020 ended with a bang. December 25th, Christmas morning, a bomb exploded in downtown Nashville. We heard the explosion, although I lived 10 miles away from downtown. The explosion damaged multiple buildings and disabled communication throughout Tennessee and surrounding states. The investigation quickly centered on one man who perished in the bombing. When we saw where the man lived, we were stunned. Although the bombing took place 10 miles from us, the bomber lived only 4 blocks from us. I have walked up these steps, and although I never met the man, I have knocked on the door next to his. I've knocked on the doors of his neighbors in the adjacent cul-de-sac. I was knocking on doors for the U.S. Census. And while it was just a job, I found enjoyment in meeting people, especially in our neighborhood. Southeast Nashville is home to a grand array of cultures, and we got to hear people's stories. I was breeding my curiosity, even while asking prescribed questions. In that cul-de-sac, I spoke to a woman who is a first-generation U.S.-born citizen with a family from Guatemala. Down the street from me were immigrants from Laos. One naturalized citizen from Honduras stared me down and waited for me to complete another interview before approaching me and asking me to interview him. He led me to his apartment where his wife pulled out her phone and activated her translation app. They were excited to tell their story and to be counted. As valuable as both empathy and curiosity are, I think the most important attitude and practice to go forward with is humility. This is especially the case if we are part of any dominant culture in our society. This chosen humility is not based on a presumed superiority. It must come from a deep down acknowledgement that our society rewards certain people for simply being born with a particular gender, sexual orientation, geographical location, economic situation, or ethnicity. But each of us can exercise the humility that reminds us that no one else approaches the world in exactly the same way that we do, regardless of who we are. In her book, Raising White Kids, Dr. Jennifer Harvey encourages parents of white children to promote what she calls race consciousness. For her, race-conscious parenting involves noticing and naming race early and often. A few years ago, 7-year-old Zoe, my white granddaughter, spotted Dr. Harvey's book when I was preparing for a workshop. She giggled. People sometimes have funny names for books. This book is called Raising White Kids. That's funny. So I tried practicing what Dr. Harvey suggested. Do you know why that book was written, I asked? Zoe shrugged. Well, because a lot of white people think of themselves as normal and of everyone else as different. They don't think about being white. I know you think about it because you have a black grandfather, and we talk about being black and white. Plus, you go to a school where there are a lot of brown people and only a few white kids. So you can see yourself as normal and as different. And you can see your friends as normal and as different. But a lot of white people can only see themselves as normal and everyone else as different. That's why there's this book. In reality, diversity means that we are all normal and we are all different. Inclusion means that we treat each person as unique. We all want to be counted, but we are unique in our combination of cultural identities. It might seem counterintuitive, but one way to develop cultural humility is to get in touch with our own cultural identities. Dr. Michael Emerson gives his university students an interesting assignment. He says, for the next 24 hours, anytime you refer to someone who is white, identify them as white. So if you're telling someone about your professor, say, my white professor. If you're talking about your friend, say, my white friend. When the students report back, Dr. Emerson sees a familiar pattern. The students who consider themselves white struggle with this exercise. It is uncomfortable for them. Many of them have never thought about their whiteness. The students of color seem to have less difficulty, but each of us is different. A few years ago, I gathered some of my white grandchildren, ages 3 to 10, to read a holiday story. It was Maggie's Gift by Catherine Peterson. The story features Mr. McGee, a lonely and cranky older widower who agrees to take in an 8-year-old girl and her 5-year-old brother who have to vacate their children's home on Christmas Eve. As he's on the phone discussing arrangements with Miss Trainer from the children's home, he asks, by the way, what color are the children? White, she says. Does it matter? Yes, he says. I have to know what color to get the doll. I've read this story aloud on many occasions, but this time this passage struck me. I had Dr. Harvey's advice in the back of my mind: name race early and often. I paused the reading to explain to my white grandchildren. When this story was written, most people believed that white people should have only white baby dolls and black people or brown people should have black or brown dolls. 10-year-old Chelsea picked up the narrative. Yeah, in those days, black people and white people weren't allowed to be together. Like if you were white and you wanted to marry someone who was black, you couldn't. Martin Luther King said that you can marry whoever you want. The color doesn't matter. It's like chocolate ice cream and vanilla. You can mix them together and then you have caramel. I know, not the perfect analogy or analysis, but she was 10. And how about that heart? Her loving and lovely sentiment came through. Then, 6-year-old Zoe chimed in. My baby doll is brown. I know, I said. And I know because the day she brought that baby doll home from the dollar store, she introduced us. She said, Peepaw, this is my baby, and she's like you. I named her Moana. I'll call her my baby, but you call her Moana. She's like you. I was gonna get the white one, but it was too much. I pushed a little. Was the white one the same kind of doll? Yeah, she said. But this one was almost free. The white one was $10. This is one way to get in touch with our own racial stories. Name race in our own lives from the beginning of when we were aware of race. Once we become curious about our own lives, we can begin genuine curiosity about others and begin to develop humility. I didn't really want to tell my own story, but it crept up on me. It was from my freshman year. Intramural basketball had begun, and although I have never excelled in any sports, I have long loved basketball. I joined the Matthews Hall team, and it wasn't long before my inabilities were discovered. Perhaps to cope, my teammates came up with the nickname Pearl in homage to Earl the Pearl Monroe, who is the spectacular player in his prime with the New York Knicks. The nickname was meant to be both affectionate and insulting. And coming from guys who were all taller, whiter, and richer than me, there was a racial element that was meant to be ironic. I knew all of this. The joke, of course, was that the worst basketball player on our team was the only black guy. My offense or non-offense is not the primary issue. My indignation is not the problem. Sometimes impact goes beyond offense. Sometimes impact goes right to self-concept. And this is why calls for racial justice or any justice are not just about me, my feelings, or my indignation. They're about treating our fellow human beings decently. Humility is never a destination. It's never a destination. It is an attitude, an awareness, a process, and a practice. I've said in the past that race is not real, but it does matter. What I mean is the idea of race, as we commonly refer to it, is not scientifically verifiable, but it is socially undeniable. To address the skeptics, I would want to speak to a young black man who was out jogging, or a young black woman who was sleeping at home, or a black man whose face was pressed against the pavement for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Those people are not available. But we have access to activists, scholars, practitioners, and policymakers. And more than that, we all have access to our own stories and the stories of those around us. An ancient text promotes acting justly, loving kindness, and walking humbly. Also, develop empathy, cultivate curiosity, practice humility. These actions will not single-handedly give us a just and inclusive society, but we cannot approach inclusion and justice without them.